Okay, good morning. Well, excellent, it's all working. Morning, everybody. Welcome. Congratulations to everyone who made it through the quite impressive traffic jam outside, for those of you who came from the Chatsworth direction. It's quite, I think it took Charlotte longer. Welcome, everybody. So we've got quite a packed agenda today. I will do my best to keep us to kind of 12:30, but we might just run into the lunchtime a little bit. So, first of all, welcome and apologies, Mike.
Firstly, sorry, Louise, just a couple of items of business. Just a reminder to use the microphones, please, when you're speaking. We've got Karen here today taking the minutes, who is unfamiliar with most of you, I think. So if you could just make sure when you are speaking, if you can perhaps just give your name at the start, and then she can get us all minuted properly, if that's all right. So, thank you, Karen. Apologies. Alistair Harvey, Nick Doran and Susan Hobson. And Andrew McCloy is unfortunately sent his apologies, and it will be his last meeting on the forum and his last meeting as chair of the Peak District National Park Authority. I think you're going to say something about that?
So those of you who don't know, Andrew McCloy is stepping down, I think, as both the chair of the authority and as a member of the authority, I think, this year. So obviously he'll no longer be the member representative on the LAF. So I just wanted to minute kind of our thanks to him. Obviously, his thanks for his original stint as chair were given at that time, but I think to thank him for all of his kind of service to the Access Forum and to Access in general in the park, and for his, albeit very short, second stint as well. I think he made a valuable contribution.
Yeah. Yes, indeed. I second that. Jo Holliday has also left the forum, so we'll be looking for a replacement for her as soon as we can.
Yeah, that's because she's no longer head of the Lockerbrook Centre.
She's left the Lockerbrook. She's got a different job in Sheffield, so that's that. Okay. Next item.
So, minutes of the meeting, of our last meeting. So, first of all, assuming everybody's seen them and read them, does anybody want to raise any kind of corrections or objections to anything that was in those minutes? Are we happy to accept them as a true record of the meeting?
Can I just again, sorry to be pedantic, but Sue Smith, just did some late corrections to the minutes that I sent out. So those minutes will be recorded as the true record. The ones that Sue's amended will be the true record, yeah.
Okay. Matters arising from the last meeting. So I'm just going to manage to print this out in the tiniest possible font. So we've got the glasses on. That's okay. Going through the minutes in order. The transport symposium. Sarah Wilkes did send me a kind of note. Andrew gave us a bit of an update from that at the last meeting, but Sarah sent me a note of that, and that included employing a sustainable transport officer. And as far as I understand it, that is underway. So hopefully by the time of our next meeting, there will be a sustainable transport officer employed in the national park, taking some of that work forward. So that's great. And maybe once they're in post, we could invite them to come and talk to us about what they're doing, which would be good. The next item on our last agenda was around the environmental and management schemes and a kind of overall what was happening in government on access and access and national parks legislation. So I've actually asked, I think Ben and Charlotte, I think, are both going to give us an update on that. If you're happy to do that now, that would be brilliant.
Yes, Charlotte Gilbert. Just briefly to say that the government have reviewed and reconsidered their stance on the payments for upland farmers. So certain schemes were going to be paying less to upland farmers than to lowland farmers, and that is now going to be paid at the lowland farmers rate. So there's no disadvantage to the upland farmers. It's not across all the schemes, but certain schemes. So that will make a difference, and it's good to know that they did reconsider.
That's great, Charlotte. Thank you. Do you want to update us on access to water and...
Oh God, I was just literally writing my notes to remind myself what
Would you
I was
like
on.
us to come back to that later?
Yes, that would be excellent.
We'll do that. So Ben will give us an update
Yeah.
on all the exciting things that he's been doing at Parliament. Okay. On the National Park Management Plan, Charlotte, you had a letter from Phil Mulligan.
Yes, to say that it's now coming to the delivery phase and that we will be contacted when that's all been sorted out. So there's nothing to report other than they're thinking about it. But, you know, there will be a role for the LAF, and as soon as that's brought forward, then we'll go. I have sat on the National Park Management Plan, was it review? Anyway, whatever it was,
Yeah.
I sat on it. I took that on because I was acting chair when John Thompson was ill. I just took that one on. So when it comes that we're invited, we need to seek either another member if anybody's interested in following up on that work. So I wasn't elected by the LAF. It was just I was following on John's work. But so if anybody wants to do that, that will be available then.
Great. Thank you, Charlotte. So, yeah, we'll wait to hear what's happening on that. Introduction of car parking charges. So, as you know, I sit on the Stannage Forum, and the update that we had there was that currently, so this is the introduction of new car parking charges at certain car parks that are not currently charged, which includes a couple at Stannage and Upper Burbage Bridge. There are several of them across the park. And as I understand it, the process for doing that is currently sitting with Derbyshire County Council. There's an element of the process that needs to be agreed by them, but they're expected to be introduced towards the end of the summer. So that's, I guess, just something to, be aware of and keep an eye on and see what the impact of that is. Nature Recovery and Access, thanks again, Dave, for presentation last time. Has anyone else got anything to update on that? I noticed, David, that the Landscape Recovery Grant scheme is open again at the moment for upland projects. I don't know if anyone's got any plans for applying for that. Excellent. Yeah, it would be great to be kept in, to know about if any of those, particularly that are successful, that you guys are involved in. It'd be really good to know about those, actually.
Yeah, it's worth mentioning we are looking to put forward landscape recovery for the whole of the High Peak estate, which is about 12,500 hectares. So we're going through an internal process at the moment, organisationally, but I fully expect us to put in an external application.
Fantastic. Martin?
Just on that, Dave referred to about sort of nature depletion in both the UK and the national park, and I noticed in the management plan under AIM 2, it talks about nature depleted countries in the world. I think the thing to notice is to note that we've also just had the third IPPC report in April, talking about a 66% likelihood of us hitting 1.5 degrees, which back Dave's point about the biodiversity crisis.
Thanks, Martin. Most of the, I think, almost all the other topics that we covered at the last meeting we're going to be returning to in later agenda items today. Is there anything on the agenda, from the minutes last time, that anybody wants to raise or comment on or update us on, other than things that are already on the agenda? Okay. Thank you. I think we were going to do the last meeting changes first. Yeah, is that okay? Yeah. So the next agenda item is just to update you on the, to talk about the proposed changes to the LAF meetings over the next year. So everybody should have received an email explaining that and summarising that and explaining what the new structure will be. But Mike, do you just want to say a few words about that?
I'm not going to add much to what I said in the email. Hopefully you'll all have seen that. We are reducing the number of, for 20 years now I've been having 4 meetings a year. We're going to reduce that down to 3 meetings a year. The reason why that is really basically because because of the restructures we've had. Now that means the support for the local access forum has effectively been reduced by and also the current review as well of staff means that we're going to be probably receiving less support from democratic services as well. So it just makes it a bit tight for us really. So we're going to try and manage that situation as best we can, not to lose the momentum, keep everybody informed about what's going on. So you can probably expect to see sort of some between meetings, email correspondence and such like, and we'll just try and make sure we keep things moving. Yeah, so that's where we are.
Yeah.
Next meeting is scheduled for Wednesday, the 1st of November. We'll come back to that later.
Does anybody have any questions or thoughts they want to... I mean, there was an opportunity to respond to the email, but I don't know if anybody's got anything they wanted to say now at the meeting about that, or if everyone's kind of happy with that in terms of a compromise so we can keep the LAF meetings going at a fairly regular pace, but also acknowledge the fact that there's reduced resource at the National Park to support.
Yeah, just be worth having something that summarises again what the purpose of the LAF is, so that we keep that in mind and focus on that. And you know, doing lighter weight meetings, taking minutes is quite time consuming. And in other forums, I've been sort of seeing, you know, dropping minutes altogether, for example, and reducing the admin that goes with it. So simplifying the process. There's probably things that could be done, but 3 meetings is fine as well.
Thank you, Jess.
The LAF does a lot of very good work and looks in detail at various different aspects of access. And over the years, we've had some very, very good speakers who've come and addressed the LAF. And then we've had some active discussions afterwards. As we can see, we're going to be faced with quite full agendas. So hope that we will still be able to have the presentations, but an exploration of how we can build the knowledge that we've gained from the presentations into the work of the wider LAF. I wondered if it would be possible for us to have slightly more subgroups, or whether there would be a structure for doing that. In the past, we've had named subgroups and they've met on a regular basis because we have actual topics that we've had to carry forward. But I think it might just be a better way to look at ad hoc subgroups to deal with whatever the issue was, and then to meet shortly after the LAF meeting while the information's still fresh in our minds, and then if we need a follow-up meeting we'll have time, and then we can report back to the wider LAF afterwards. I don't know if that's everybody thinks that that's a way forward.
There seems to be general nodding, kind of, yeah. I think that worked quite well for what we're going to come to later, which was looking at the rights of way maintenance plan with Derbyshire, that we were able to bring a smaller group together to look in more detail and then report back. So, yeah, so if anyone's got a topic they'd like to have a subgroup or indeed a site visit on, then shout and we can kind of pull groups of people together to do that. But yeah, hopefully we'll still be able to sort of maintain the depth of what we've been able to do. I think the other issue that I can foresee is because they're slightly longer between meetings, it's possible that things like consultations or say, for example, things like Silence Mine, where there's a consultation, might happen in the period between meetings, and there's no meeting for us when we can actually bring it, you know, to the full group. So it may be that we might need to look at different ways to gather views from the LAF in order to be able to respond to some of those things in between meetings.
In the past, where we've responded to some quite meaty consultations, and again we've set up a subgroup to just deal with that. So I think that as well is a way forward if there's something that, you know, like the landscape review,
Yeah.
it took a lot of thought to go into that, so that might be another way of doing it.
Jez?
Yeah, just to elaborate on what's said before, one of the things I do, they've switched to far less meetings. We have a WhatsApp, a dreaded WhatsApp, I know, because probably many of us are on many of them, but they are effective for those in-between meeting discussions because you can post documents, information. It's a good way to share it out as long as everybody's disciplined about not having loads of random chit-chat. And shared documents, you know, that people can see, you know, and you can update. So it's sort of, we have like a living agenda for one of the meetings I'm with, because it's an event program management type thing, really. And people can just always refer to that and see what the current position is. And I don't know, there's technology that we could probably use for some of these things that would help.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you. Martin?
Just on the WhatsApp, Jez, I have to say I much prefer email for documents to come through and trying to coordinate and remember what's come through. I mean, I still print quite a few papers off if they are a few pages. I just don't like reading online, and I find WhatsApp, trying to find the links, and as you say, just sometimes the irrelevant information comes through. In the moment present, emails just come through for the laugh with documents, and I mean, again, preparation for this, I was just going through, you know, putting a couple of names in, and I can see who's sent emails. I can make sure that I've all got the documents. Maybe that's my digital skills, but so I prefer email for something like a formal meeting like this.
In general, do people prefer email to WhatsApp, for, as Martin has suggested, for where it's things like documents and... There's a lot of nodding. Jess, go on.
Just to say, it comes back to you've got to do the whole thing. The WhatsApp's for the discussion. So, say for our parish council, you go on the website and all the paperwork's there. So I hate having to search through loads of emails to find it, because we get 4 emails typically with different paperwork in. And instead, you just have one place you can go and it's all there.
Yeah.
And that's, for me, that works better. And you don't have to... But also, you need to use WhatsApp on a computer, not on a phone, if you're going to use it for documents.
That's true,
which is
yeah.
what I do. And
Which
maybe
is
everybody else
tricky.
is thinking WhatsApp on a phone, which would be a totally worse world.
That's true. So maybe, Mike, if we can find out if the park has a facility for these kinds of publicly shared document. Claire?
Maybe, Claire Griffin. Teams, Microsoft Teams or Slack or SharePoint are all pretty common resources. And I think something like that, just to echo what everyone else said, you know, we're going to have to be doing a lot more in between meetings. And I guess the volunteer members are going to have to kind of get used to driving things a bit more with less support from the employed members. So I think perhaps moving to a system like that would be quite useful. Then we can have a kind of, you know, the chat function, the sort of WhatsApp function, but also a kind of document repository. I think that would be my suggestion, I think.
Thanks, Claire. Sue and then Paul.
Yeah, this is something that Natural England have been looking at in the past, haven't they, about supporting local access forums, but we'll also speak with our IT team about this, and we have in our audience a member from the IT team, so I don't know if David would like to say anything.
Morning all. My name's David Higley. I'm the web manager for the Peak District. Have been 15 years as of yesterday. But I work part-time, and this is one of my non-working days, so I'm here to do a demo later. But as it came up, I also run my own business, doing digital support, digital marketing and digital governance for small organisations, and all the stuff that you're talking about says, yes, this sounds very familiar. How do you actually get this information so that there's a single copy of documents, a single alert to the people that need it, so that you're not wading through countless emails and it's not taking you an hour to do 10 minutes work. So there are some solutions that I do all of the time privately. So yeah, if LAF is a constituted unincorporated body, then that could work, in which case that solution probably isn't the right one. So that would be using Google Workspaces or Office 365 as a dedicated domain. And then you could link in Slack and Trello and other tools there. but 'cause I'm the web manager, we could create a section on the website with a login so that documents weren't available to the general public, but were available to you. And it can have a nice shortcuts that you can add that to your favourites. So it's just quick login and simple username and password that you don't share with anyone outside of the group. And then you can just access these documents, and it should be fairly straightforward to get hold of. So it's just trying to cut down the amount of time wasted on boring IT admin, which is really dull.
Thank you. Maybe that's something we can have a conversation with. Maybe Mike and I could have a chat with you at some point and see if we can come up with a suggestion. Thank you very much. Paul, did you want to?
I was only going to suggest that at work we use G Drive for coordinating multiple people and multiple clients dotted around the world. And the beauty is, your IT job will know, it allows collaboration on the document, so people can comment on a document, and you can have them as commentator, you can have them as editor. It just allows a pretty good collaborative way of working, and you can loop everything in on that. We find it works.
Thank you, Paul. Jez, and then we'll...
Just very quick, I think everything we do just about is public, isn't it? So you don't need logons and stuff. It can just be posted. If something was confidential, email it out, rather than trying to create logons and everybody having to remember yet another logon, because I've got a dozen plus already. So if it is public information, it probably doesn't need the complexity.
Yeah, thanks, Jez. I think that's where, yes, the boundary between what is our public information and what are our private discussions. Well, that's a very live topic at the moment, isn't it? But yes, we can think about that. Thanks everyone for that. That was really helpful, and I think we've got some good ideas about how we can move things forward. For me, the thing is always let's keep it as simple as possible. We can kind of create complicated systems and then they don't get used. So we'll start small and build up to what we think will work. I can see nodding coming from the back there. Simple as possible. Thank you. Okay, thanks everyone. Thank you. So we'll move into the kind of, that was all our administration, so I'll move into the kind of the meat of the meeting. So actually the first thing that we have is a contribution from the member of the public. So I think Sue Woods from the Green Lane Alliance is going to, if you wanted to come forward and use the microphone in front of you and just press the button so that it works. Perfect. Thank you, Sue.
This is in response to the agenda item on green lanes. We appreciate the importance of the National Park Management Plan and that any action on green lanes must be consistent with it. As I'm sure you know, the aims of the management plan to 2028 include maintaining natural beauty, assisting nature recovery, conserving a sense of tranquility and reducing carbon emissions. And among the emerging priorities for the plan are balancing opportunities for enjoyment with conserving a fragile environment and overcoming barriers to access. Monitoring and managing the use of green lanes remains highly pertinent to all these aims and objectives. Yet, worryingly, there appears to be no green lane action plan for the year ahead. We're also disappointed that there is no report today on last year's 2022 to 2023 Green Lanes Action Plan. This lack of a detailed report doesn't allow LAF and interested members of the public to judge the effectiveness of last year's plan and what has been achieved. It appears to us that focused work on green lanes is being discontinued. And if this is indeed the case, we ask LAF to consider whether they are happy with it being discontinued. If focused work on green lanes is to stop, we think that LAF should ask for and receive a focused rights of way work programme, setting out objectives for access, rights of way in the year ahead, including where work on green lanes sit within this plan. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Sue. At this stage, I'm not proposing that we have a full discussion on the Green Lane strategy because we'll come to that under Sue's agenda item later. But does anyone have any questions or clarifications they'd like to ask of Sue Woods regarding her contribution and all the kind of contribution to the Green Lanes Alliance? No. Thank you. In that case, thank you, Sue, for the contribution. And yet, as I said, we're returning to the topic of the Green Lanes. Will become under the later agenda item. So I'm sure we'll come back to what you've raised there. Thank you. Okay. So, moving on to our next agenda item, which is our themed topic for today, which is Access for All, which I think Sue Smith is going to kick off for us, if that's okay.
This meeting, or this item is in three parts. So it relates to the reports tabled, which at the last meeting in March we gave an update about the Access for All funding following the announcement at the end of January. There's a display behind you with some of the work that's been undertaken, and I'm just going to show just a few slides to start off with. So the first part that I'll be presenting will be a little bit about the DEFRA Access funding, and then we're going to move on to what makes an accessible place and a discussion on what makes an accessible place and how we can support accessibility within the national park. So the DEFRA Access for All funding, it's a 3-year programme for infrastructure and information for access for all. It's for capital funding. The year 1 funding was received in November, and it's about the removal of barriers to access so that protected landscapes are for everyone. It is capital funding, so it deals with the creation or acquisition of assets. We are in year 2 at the moment, so nil funding in year 2, and it's about monitoring and reporting and of course planning for the year 3 with the £158,000 anticipated. So Accessible Peak District, what we've been doing is looking at building, informing and supporting, so those 3 areas, and also 3 areas to deliver more places, more styles and more mobility. Accessibility is at the heart of the authority's work, and this funding has been used to create the more miles, places and mobility so that everyone feels welcome. And the full amount of the £131,000 has been spent within the 4-month period. And these are some of the areas that we've spent it on, as well as you can see from the display behind, and then I'm just going to show a few quick slides afterwards. But what this has delivered is 5.6 kilometres of accessible paths, and that's been done through resurfacing, widening, ramping and installing or removing gates. It's been promoting Miles Without Styles routes as being truly inclusive. We have a new video on our homepage for accessibility, the Access for All homepage, and developing an in-house system for route videos, which hopefully those of us who can stay after lunch will be able to view after the meeting with David. Mapping and guides for new sensory trails so that everyone slows down to connect with nature, and I've got some examples on the display panels behind. New welcoming signage and symbols to provide at-a-glance information. And again, the symbols get around the language difficulties. And undertaking an audit for Accessible Castleton as an accessible village. And I've got a couple of slides to just talk through that as well, and that's a work in progress. We've also acquired 6 trampers, an electric wheelchair, and we've already getting really good feedback on that. A trike. We've provided 5 all-terrain wheelchairs. You saw one at the March meeting, which had just arrived. And these 5 all-terrain wheelchairs are free to borrow so that no one feels excluded. And I've also provided some cycle hire leaflets around the table as well to show the costs for cycles, and for all the inclusive cycles, trampers, etc. Slide showing the before, during and after works at Surprise View. So this is the view across the Hope Valley, and what we've said here is that the Surprise now is the view rather than it being inaccessible for wheelchair users. And we've created more miles. So it works at Long Causeway, Surprise View and Redmires, all in close proximity to Sheffield, and works on the Tissington Trail to create a bypass ramp, a wider step-free gate, and also to widen the trail to accommodate variety of different users. So if you're in the tramper and you meet a couple of cyclists, then there's space for everyone. So more welcoming, more mobility. So bringing joy for everyone. And on one of these trampers, Mike's not had a go yet, but on one of these trampers, they are fun. The ones that we've got on the trails will keep up with bikes as well. So again, it's all about inclusivity and everyone joining in. And it gives us a lot more to explore as well. And as I said, we're celebrating our special places, so the trampers are all logoed up with our special places. More places, and it can be really small things like a step. We've heard before at these meetings from local access forums about how a curb or a step, in this case into a shelter, can prevent access. The sensory trails, slowing things down to connect with nature, that's for everyone. Everyone slows down. Providing a welcome, and that means in signage depicting everyone sharing the route. So that's for our new interpretation on Tissington Trail. We started the design work in year 1. We've been providing new interpretation panels in year 3. And those interpretation panels will provide the information that people need. And that also includes that picture there with the sensory story for Castleton, which is displayed at the back of the room. And that's mention of Castleton leads me on to the next bit and this theme of the item, which is an accessible place. What makes an accessible destination? At the back of the report, I attached in Appendix 1 a summary of what we've delivered, but also what the authority already provides and our ambition. So there's 3 pillars really of accessibility: information, facilities, customer service, and they lead to the decision to visit and also the experience. But I've also put at the bottom there, what about the journey? Because the journey, the arrival and the return home affects the decision to visit again. And not just that location, but other places. So, place for everyone. These are sort of the things. And again, at the back of the room, I've got the work that's been compiled for Castleton, a catalogue of information that includes a lot of these items. And at the end, I've popped down the welcome and support, which links in nicely with the previous slide, because that is crucial. But there's a lot more than that as well. So just some ideas, but I put them down as something to think about for the next items. And this is what we've been doing for Accessible Castleton. So this is some of the things we've been looking at. We're looking at creating a template. So basically, what we said is, if you're creating an area for people, the National Trust do it really well. If you're thinking about where to go, then you think, I'll go and visit a National Trust property. And you can tick off the sort of things that you know will be available there. we know with our various locations in the park, our visitor centres, our cycle hire, then again we tick that off. And many other locations which are destinations in themselves. So we decided to go a bit big, and we said, right, let's look at a destination. Let's look at a really amazing place, somewhere where people are already visiting. And that's why we chose Castleton and said, right, we've already got various things at Castleton. We've got the obvious, we've got the visitor centre, but we've also got Miles Without Styles routes as well. There's a family walk there. How do we draw all that together and also provide a bit more? So that previous list that said giving people the information that they need, that's the sort of thing we're looking at. So it's not just a couple of Miles Without Styles routes, but it's saying to people, how's the best way to if you've got mobility problems, how you can walk around the village. It's looking at some of the activities that are available, which might be just really, really low-key activities. It might be just having a picnic somewhere. Where would you go when you arrive in Castleton for a picnic? And where children can run around. What about if you've got a dog? What about any dietary requirements? So it's all these sort of things that feed into accessibility, and that's what I've said here, to provide the information needed. The work is supporting the community and businesses. The auditing that was carried out and the training that was offered by Visit Peak District in Derbyshire. That training was available to the small businesses in the area, and the audit and the work has already identified barriers, and more importantly it's identified opportunities as well, so it's a work in progress. That's it for me from this slideshow. I would like to show a movie from Gillian Scotford, Accessibility UK. Gillian has been working on compiling the information for the Accessible Castleton work. She doesn't mention it in her video, but she mentions about what's really important for an accessible place, including examples elsewhere of how this is approached. And while I just set this up, you'll also notice in the report that I've given a link to the Programme and Resources Committee meeting. That was in April. Now, also at that meeting, we were reporting on the Diversity Action Plan, so the work that the authority is doing on Everyone Welcome, and we also had championing national parks as well. A really good presentation on that, which you can see on YouTube as follow-up, and there's a summary of that as well. The video, I think it's about 6 minutes. There we go.
Hello, my name's Gillian Scotford and I'm the Director of Accessible UK. As a parent of 3 children, 2 of them having severe disabilities, I was passionate about making a difference and making life easier for all those people, 14.6 million disabled people in the UK. So our Access Consultancy helps support lots of people around the country with audits, training, consultancy, and so many ways in helping support and make life easier for people on a simple day out that most of us take for granted. Sometimes you can take for granted how easy things are in life until someone suddenly, which can happen in the blink of an eye, the click of your fingers, you know, your life can change overnight. And my life changed. I was a fit and healthy district nursing sister. I worked many years building up a career, and then all of a sudden, when my second son Thomas was born, he had a major heart defect and he sustained severe brain damage in that first week of life, and it was catastrophic brain injury. And so from that moment on, I had to care for him with my husband and family day and night until he sadly passed away at the age of 21 years of age. He taught me so much that actually inspired me to set up Accessible Derbyshire about 12, 13 years ago, and to create a website which was an accessible destination, which is something that Accessible UK now, this is our expertise in helping people achieve this. Accessibility means different things to different people. So if I was a wheelchair user, I would require certain things that would make the day go smoother, basically. So for a family like mine, I had, like I say, 3 children and an extended family of parents and brothers and sisters, and there was, their children also. So a large group of 18 of us would go on holiday, and they were very supportive of my family. So when we went anywhere, it was always a major struggle to find that information that we were looking for. Where were the toilets? Where was the parking? Could we get into a certain cafe or attraction? And there's this constant need to find this information. If I had sight loss or hearing loss, there are other things that I would need. So accessibility means different things to different people. And when it comes to creating an accessible destination, it is about gathering together all that information. Information is key. Information is so important because people can then decide whether that destination is right for them. Disability awareness training is very important. At Accessible UK, we have trained hundreds of accessibility champions across the country who go on to feel really confident in delivering great customer service to their visitors. So, you know, another tip is really push to have your staff trained in things like dementia and autism and sight and hearing loss, along with mobility challenges. So all these things, if someone is trained, and especially when it comes to language, you know, how do I speak to someone, what should I say, the right wording? Quite often people are so afraid of saying the wrong thing that they don't say anything at all, and that's such a shame. So this is about people just being themselves, being human, and giving that warm welcome like we would give everybody else. We all love the towns and villages across the country, especially those within national park settings, etc. But we always wonder, you know, with those narrow walkways, those cobbled streets, those quaint little courtyards. This is why we love these towns and villages. But the important thing is that quite often those features of a certain town or village will not change. And it's important that as families we know where we can visit and what we can manage. So just be very clear and honest about what information you provide. It's often the little things that make a huge difference. Things like a simple pen and paper to be able to write down if communication is difficult. It might be that there are steps up to a cafe, but the staff involved help bring down a cup of tea and cake to your family in another area. There are challenges, but there are ways in which people can still have a really lovely day when people go that extra mile. If I could give you one tip, I've got lots of tips, but never wait to be perfect before you describe what you have at your venue, because we don't live in a perfect world. So any town or village or a city, you know, places have lots of challenges and we can never be perfect. So when people think, oh, I can't write about that because although I've got level access, I've not got an accessible toilet, we need the information so we can make that decision. Well, we can get in, but we might need to go somewhere else for an accessible toilet. So get on and write it down and make that information very clearly displayed on your website. So we're very proud to have worked on a number of projects which have improved accessibility within destinations and created accessible destinations, like Accessible Derbyshire, which was inspired by my children, and also working with Visit England on projects such as the North York Moors Access Project, where we delivered audits, accessibility champion training and consultancy, and supported 12 businesses who then all came together to create fabulous itineraries and give that overall improved picture of accessible tourism in that area. So if you would like help, we would love to help you in being the best that you can possibly be. So why not join our army of Accessible UK accessibility champions and be the best that you can be? From small businesses to large, we have trained so many people and they've gone on to do fabulous things. At Accessible UK, we hope that everyone finds that accessible gem that is perfect for them.
Right, and then I'm going to, the third part is over to John for his presentation. So I'm just going to, John's got some slides for later, which I'll set.
Yeah, I'll those in a minute later on. Right, good morning everybody. I'm John Toe. I'm a volunteer ranger with the National Park and I've served on the LAF for the last 2 years. When Sue asked me to take part in the presentation, she said you can use any style you like as long as it's not Elvis. Okay. So, imagine I'm a very positive, determined young woman with mobility difficulties who lives in Windermere. The presentation I'm about to give is called My Plans for a Trip from Windermere to Castleton for the Weekend. I have complex health issues, severe brittle asthma, vocal cord dysfunction, unable to weight bear on my legs due to osteoporosis, on constant fentanyl patches, a very powerful pain reliever which she puts on her shoulders, prone to seizures, slight problems due to cataract treatment I had recently, awaiting an appointment and a solution. I have FND, which is functional neurological disorder, and that's how the message you get from the brain to whatever you want to do. So basically, the receiving and sending the messages doesn't always work. She's got fibromyalgia and have broke my back in 3 places. I think apart from that, all's good at the moment. Just to add, I've been on short breaks to Paris, Prague and Italy so far this year. The assistant staff at Manchester Airport are beginning to get to know me. So, which wheelchair would be best for this trip? Trixie or Willow? I always name my wheelchairs. I'll use Willow. My wheelchair is my legs. This does not stop me skiing or sailing and helping the Lake District National Park as a volunteer, checking out their Miles Without Styles, etc. I was a competent skier and sailor earlier in my life. A hill walker, trek to Everest Base Camp, climber, canoeist, outdoor instructor. I have my ML and I'm the Northwest Outdoor Advisor for Girl Guiding. I'm also a guider. To mention but a few things. Before I leave home, I need to do a good deal of research and planning. Sadly, many people don't get past this stage. As a result of my problems, I can't drive. I also have a limited budget. Okay, train to Windermere to Hope. It's okay on the outward journey, but I can't get home. I can't cross to the eastbound platform at Hope, up and over steps. YHA Accessible website tells me this, but the Castleton Information Centre suggests that Hope as the station. I request assistance from the rail companies prior to my trips. They organise provision of ramps on and off the trains, etc. Could go Windermere to Sheffield and then a bus to Castleton if I can get Willow on the bus. All buses are different. I can fit on most buses, but I need the space for me. But there needs to be a space for me. Not always the case if there's another wheelchair. I can't book. Where to stay? I need a fully accessible room with disabled toilet facilities. Shower would be a bonus. YHA offer a disabled-friendly room at Lucille Hall, Castleton. Room needs to have space for my wheelchair as I transfer from the chair to the bed. Feeding. I'm gluten-free, egg-free and dairy-free, plus other allergies, all for medical reasons. I need a suitable restaurant in Castleton. I need the following meals: breakfast, lunch, dinner. Access to the nearest suitable hospital. I could need a specialist ambulance crew to administer drugs en route. Normal trip Windermere to Lancaster Hospital can take about an hour. Access information boards. I can't get over curbs. Easy access to visitor centre. Automatic doors. Things at my height. Please talk to me, not my chair or my friend or carer if I have someone with me. I want to be independent. May not be able to use my legs, but the other things work well, with exceptions. Good surfaces, no cobbles or deep gravel, that's painful. Visible drop-down visible drop-downs, always helpful. Serviceable, clean, disabled toilets. Access to shops, pubs and other facilities. Interesting things to do. Can I go down the famous show caves? No. Miles without stars. Hills don't present much difficulty to me as my wheelchair will go most places. Only one short route. We'll give it a try. A longer, more challenging route would be better. What else can I do? I was able-bodied. I wasn't born with all my minor problems. I have what is called acquired disability, not a congenital disability, which normally is from birth. Many people with acquired disability have difficulty in accepting it. I have embraced it. Is Castleton the place for me? One life, live it. Now I want to show you me in action and some of my equipment and other equipment I find useful. So we just look at the screen at the moment. That's a going sailing. This is down south, and yes, she was a climber, so being on a rope and in a harness doesn't really worry her too much. So we get lowered in. Oops, sorry. Let's go back a bit. We've gone too far. Right. That's one of the wheelchairs. That's on the back of somebody's car. An ordinary, normal tow hitch. The frame is lightweight, fit any car. Just wants the ball joint, drop a pin through and you can drop it on. And then you just strap that one on. That's Trixie. That's an all-terrain mountain trike. Originally, when she bought it, she had it totally mechanical. Now she's got it powered. There's a back wheel that drops down, and within that back wheel there is a motor, and that will go anywhere. She's been halfway up Cairngorm in that. The only reason she can get all the way to the top of Weatherton. That's the conventional wheelchair. The guy here, again, at where she gets the wheelchairs from, he's disabled, he's in a chair. So he understands about wheelchairs. What we've just had here is we've just had a motor unit fitted. It's detachable, just unscrew there and there. You can push that out the way, you're back to a standard wheelchair. But that will go anywhere. The moment that's got normal tyres on, you can put all-terrain tyres on there. We've got a set of those, we just drop them on. Oh yeah, we go skiing as well. This is in Kendal. It's the law that she has to be tethered to somebody. Albeit she can ski on her own, the law doesn't allow it. These are her ski poles, very short ones. The guy at the back is just making sure that things don't go awry. All right, we're in the boat now. Oh yes, and we're driving it. This was a big ocean-going yacht, and it caters for disabled people. It's down Southampton way, and yes, you got great enjoyment out of that. Here we are down below in the mat room. Got the wheelchair, just conventional wheelchair, discussing where they're going, etc., etc. This is Blee. Blee goes everywhere, and you'll see lots of photographs. If you ever go on the Herdy site, you'll see Blee featured in all different countries and different parts of the world. This is the top of Orish Head. This was the Queen's Jubilee, the lighting of the beacons. And it was a very wet day, but again, big smiles, big laughs. Back to skiing again in Kendal. Oh, and I can also fly. That's in the Chill Factor at Manchester, where anybody can go free fall. Just needs these two guys to help her in. And that's also at Chill Factor. Slightly real as snow, it's artificial snow, but again, we can use that as well. Some of you will recognise this as Alveston Castle. Again, we've got the same basic wheelchair, but we've now made it long wheelbase. So we've got an axle here and an axle there. The reason that you're on the back axle is because the chair's got balance. So you move the wheels to the back, and then you put a cycle unit on the front. Again, slips in exactly the same place as where the motor unit goes, and you go off cycling. Oh, and that's up on Orish Head again. That's the family and all the grandkids. And that's just about ready to set off to come to Castleton. The case automatically clips onto a frame on the back, and she just goes that round, up onto the train, etc., etc. Oh, that was a small train. There you are, there's the other train. This is the wheelchair. This one's now got a motor in that back wheel, and that will go anywhere. And that's about, let's go down the hill. And we can even go to the seaside. Winter time presents no difficulty. We'll go out in the winter as well. The young lady there is my daughter. She lives independently in Windermere and works and does a full-time job as much as she can. My interest isn't in those, my interest is in those with additional needs, and extends well beyond my daughter. Perhaps something we can talk about later. Thank you for listening. Anybody got any questions?
Thank you, John. That's
Right.
amazing. So yeah, any
Oh,
kind
you're
of,
there.
I guess, yeah, questions or questions, comments, thoughts on anything that you've heard really from Sue or from John. I think from my perspective, what has really come across is that work on access isn't just about the physical work that we do on the ground. It's also about the information that we're able to provide so that people can plan. Because and any one of those things going wrong completely destroys the possibility of going on holiday if you can't get on the bus or the train or do anything when you're here. So that's quite, I'm sure maybe those of you who work in those organisations that do these things know that, but I think it really emphasises that importance of that to me.
Just to say, we're up in the Cairngorms last week and went into the information centre in the Cairngorms, and what they've got is these cards, and it's for anybody, and what it's about is help us make the Cairngorms more walking, cycling and wheelchair friendly. And then there's 4 questions on the back. Do you wish there was a new path somewhere? Does anywhere feel unsafe when you're on foot, cycling or using a wheelchair? What would help you choose to walk or cycle? Which streets, roads, paths and public access spaces could be improved? And QR code there, and you can actually reply to the Cairngorm National Park and say, yeah, been so-and-so, this needs a little attention or that needs a little attention. Or could we just make a drop down here that isn't there at the moment? So, yeah, whether we can adopt something like that, I wouldn't like to say.
I don't know if it would be appropriate for me to ask a question, but
Come on.
one of the projects that I work with is called Accessible Belper. So in 2016, Miles Without Stars won the best big project from Accessible Derbyshire, and Accessible Belper won the best small town project, and that's doing an awful lot of what Sue and John have said, just raising awareness about accessibility issues amongst shopkeepers and hospitality businesses. And COVID has really messed that up, and there was lots of momentum, certainly post-Olympics and Paralympics, and then lots of people unfortunately have died or just stopped doing it, and the air in the balloon seems to have reduced, and I want to pump it back up again. And how do we do this at scale? So how do we do this in Castleton, Bakewell, other Peak District towns, and how do we do it outside of the Peak Districts as well? So in Amber Valley, there's the 4 big towns of Belper, Heanor, Ripley and Alfreton, and there is enough momentum and enough memory in Belper, but not in the other towns. And how do we say these simple messages at scale? So just tell how to say to shopkeepers how to measure the width of your door, how to then publish the information, because as you say, people plan. Being disabled is expensive and it takes an awful lot of planning. They're amazing planners, simply because you don't want to have a horrible day. So if we can make that easier for people, and as I say, do that at scale, including lots of independent shops. Lots of towns have got big multinationals. We've got tons of independent shops, and it's actually quite hard and expensive for those independent providers to, especially if you're in a listed building, how do you adapt the shop? But there's lots of things that you can do by having an iPad and a phone that you can then say, hold the iPad, have a look at the cards. You want a card for mum or for your dad for Father's Day? Here's how you can buy it, and here's a PDQ that you can use to pay for it. And simple things like that, and how can we do that at scale and share it with people and make it really easy and accessible and cheap?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
Can I just come in on that? I think a lot of disabled people want to be very independent.
Yeah.
Certainly my daughter is extremely independent. she will find a way, like if she goes into Kendal shopping, she has her own route.
Yeah.
She knows that in that shop there's a lift that will go from that level to that level, or she'll go down a particular street or they do adapt.
Yeah.
And as I say, she works in Lakeland in the Windermere, and there, that shop now, the aisles are all wide enough. Because Lindsay's been around, and yeah, I don't think they're asking for a lot. It's just a little bit of common sense.
Yeah.
We're not asking for, let's flatten the Peter Street out and make it all nice flat roads.
Yeah.
Now, we don't want that.
Yeah.
We still want the hills. They're still accessible to people who have got disabilities. It might be that instead of having a gate there, if we've got a way straight through, it makes life a lot easier.
Thank you.
And it's all about that.
It's a Sue and then Claire.
Yeah, I was just picking up really on what David was saying when he was talking about, you know, how do we give the support needed, the support for businesses and towns as well as providing the information that's needed, and that's why we used some of the DEFRA Access funding to establish a template. So it wasn't just about gathering together the information; it was identifying what information would be helpful. And then the work is with a group is how we present that information. So it's how we make it available on websites, how we make it available visitor centres, but also as well the audits taking place in the with all the businesses. And I mentioned again about the training that had been offered to local businesses in the area as well.
Thank you, Claire.
Claire Griffin. Thank you both, John and Sue. That was brilliant. John, I'm lucky enough to be able-bodied, but I'm acutely aware I work in a hospital that, you know, anyone can pick up an acquired disability at any time. And I spent a bit of time with Andrew Murley, who used to be a LAF member, on holiday. And it's a real eye-opener as someone who has never had accessibility problems. You know, he acquired his disability later in life, and people grab his wheelchair and move him around and you know, talk to me as if I'm his carer and I'm just there to help him with steep hills with gravel on it. And you know, the world shouldn't be like that, should it? So thanks to your daughter for bringing it home to us about the difficulties that we all could face if our life went a different way. Thank you. So I've got a couple of points on Sue's talk as well. This is like superbly timely because so I work in a cancer hospital. I work at the Christie Hospital, and once a year there's a big clinical conference called the American Society of Clinical Oncology, and loads of it's about, you know, kind of pharma and like, you know, changes in science and new medicines. But there's a big theme now about kind of living well with cancer, and there's actually a couple of published studies which have just come out. They've just kind of published their results to say that exercising with cancer, even while you're on treatment, while you're having chemotherapy and radiotherapy, there's a really strong association with a reduction in mortality and morbidity, sort of 15-20%. I can't quite remember the stats, but I could dig out the articles. So this is fantastically timely that all this work is done to improve accessibility. So I guess the only other thing I want to say is, so you've got this other tranche of 158k coming in the year 3. What are you going to spend it on? It sounds ace.
We're already planning. And in some respects, yes, we're already planning, and in some respects, the year 1 funding was leading towards that as well. So we developed a number of items, and again, if you click on the committee report, you've got the full list of what we were delivering. So it's building on what we've already done in year 1 funding, building on what we know. Working with partners and very much the local access forums. That's why we've been updating the local access forum on all this work, and the local access forum has been instrumental really in involvement with accessibility. I remember back in 2017 when we had Accessible Derbyshire and Craig Grimes, and we were just out on the lawn, a sunny day, rather like today. In terms of other projects, well, we have ambitions, and some ambitions can be costly. So again, it's looking to see how we can match it with other funding that's available. Unfortunately, we now have a period of time that we can prepare fully for the expenditure, but it shouldn't be a problem spending it.
Yeah, Jeff.
Yeah, thanks very much for the presentation. That was kind of very illuminating, really, and a great pause for thought. Just looking at Sue's paper, it mentions what you were doing about Accessible Castleton, and it mentioned the visitor centre. I'm just wondering what was happening with the visitor centre, because there was the proposal to close them all, but I'm not across the detail of what's happened since. But I don't know. Anyone? Sarah might be able to
Sarah,
tell
you
me.
turned up at just the right moment.
Hi. So I think we have put a press release out. We've got a donor who's come forward who's really keen to help work with us and see what we can do to make our visitor centres sustainable. So we're in the very early days. They want to remain anonymous, but they have a close association with the National Park. So we're in the process of kind of working through that. So currently we have paused the process that's looking at closing the visitor centres indefinitely, really. We know we'll have to there will be changes to make them sustainable, but the staff have been told that we can see sort of nothing happening at least until into next year. So that's where we are. We were at a pause to gather this donor together, make sure we secure it, and to really look at what a sustainable future of visitor centres and visitor information will be going forward.
Thanks.
Just I've never really thought very much about how important for accessibility visitor centres might be, until we were just talking about it today. So I assume part of the problem is that not enough people are going in there and spending money, but whether issues like benefits for accessibility taken into account, really.
I think they are, and it'd be a really important point to take forward and make sure that's included in the work that goes forward. I'd be really interested to have a chat to you, Jeff, around it all, but not.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you.
I just at one point, just take a wheelchair down a pavement in any town. I live in Belper. If I walk along the main street in Belper, pushing the wheelchair always veers toward the road because there's a camber. And it's even that small a difference that can make a tremendous difference. Well, if you're wheeling it as a wheelchair, you've got to keep correcting. And it's little things, it's absolutely little things that can make a hell of a difference. As I say, just fix a little problem, you've fixed a whole lot of problems. So, yeah.
I've got a question, unless there's anybody else who wants to. So, you mentioned the long causeway at Stanage. So repairs have been done at the bottom to make it access for all, and then hopefully gradually to make it access for some, and some people will be able to eventually get to the pole at the top. At the Stanage Forum meeting recently, the steering group wanted to thank you because actually, despite the fact that it washed out, it's actually a huge improvement, and generally it's working really well. So there was an overall thanks from the Stanage Forum for the work on that. Because I think that issue is really important. And a good illustration of that is, some of you might know that Totley Running Club did all the Ethels in one go at the weekend. So the whole club went out, and they basically, a bit like somebody did all the Monroes last year, basically a member of the club got to every trig point in the Ethels on one day, on Sunday. But the one at Stanage Pole was done by Tobias. Do you know if I say Captain Tobias, does that mean anything to anyone? Remember there was Captain Tom who did the walking during COVID. So there was a kid called Tobias from Sheffield who has cerebral palsy, and he did basically his version of that, and he got Young Sports Personality of the Year that year. He lives on my street. He did it up and down outside my house. But him and his mum in his wheelchair did Stanage Pole. It's on Twitter. I'll send it to you. And to me, that's a real testament to why we bother to do these things. Some people don't like it, and there are questions around whether you start to sort of sanitise some areas where you have so much kind of flat path. But I think that's, particularly on an estate like Stanage where there's so much else, actually that's sort of quite an amazing thing. So my question to you is, we've done accessible audits of places like Castleton or Belper. Has anyone done an accessibility audit of the North Lees estate as it belongs to the park to say what could we do here on a wilderness estate rather than in what might a plan be to make, I mean, whether it's possible or not is a different question, but what could a plan be to keep the wilderness but make it a more accessible place?
Certainly in terms of the campsite, that has focused very much on accessibility in terms of the accessible camping pod. So there's details of that available to book. There's also the accessible facilities there as well. But one of the later items on the agenda today is talking about the work that Derbyshire County Council have been doing on public rights of way throughout their area. And as part of that, we've been identifying various routes in the North Lees area with the potential for connectivity, because it's about not just works required for maintenance, but where those routes will take people. It's providing places where people will want to go as well, and providing the links. And it was interesting that Louise was saying about the works that we've done at the bottom end of Long Causeway, and that gradually we're developing up the hill. There does come a point where we say this is what we're promoting as Miles Without Styles, but actually you can go further, and we already do that on the Tissington Trail. So we tell people as part of the route that you can start off at Parsley Hay, or even start off at Hartington Station. You can go as far as Ruby Wood. But actually you can go much further, but just bear in mind the gradient when you're heading back, because it's great when you're heading out down the Tissington Trail, but on the way back you do notice the gradient.
Thank you, Sue. Any more questions? Jez and then Martin, and then we'll move on to the next slide.
Yeah, just a quick one really. Obviously there's a huge amount of focus on the physical side of it, but the digital side of it as well. We've heard several times now about the pre-planning and so on, and I think you need to bear in mind some people have become very expert at that pre-planning, like your daughter. I'm sure she knows all the places, but simple thing, when people are new to it, I wonder how easy they find it. So I just looked at Peak District Disabled Access, found the page on that, found the Miles Without Styles, started reading down, and it looks as if you have to go to the visitor centre to get a book. But if you carry on further down, eventually you find there's a whole load of online information showing all the routes, which is great. But just simple things like that, and I wonder how easy it is for people who aren't proficient to find some of the information even now. And it is there, but finding it is key. And doing some sort of, survey, working with people who are new to it, to ask them how they've gone about finding information and make sure that they do find it.
Thank you. Martin.
John, you mentioned sort of drop-down curbs and things. I think that it's important to emphasise the infrastructure, making sure that the curbs are repaired and they're litter-free and that sort of hard infrastructure. And as well also just think about sort of support generally for people, particularly for if you're not using a car. So things like that there's public toilets available, water points are really useful, seating, shelters, and again if you're doing it. Perhaps to think about maybe Castleton and other areas, if you're travelling by public transport, you carry more stuff than perhaps you would normally go out just for the whole day. So do you need to you then have to carry it around all day? If you've got your car, you leave it in your car. So having luggage centres just to put deposit things might be an idea. I've just come back from the Netherlands. The cycle racks have got charging points for e-bikes. And again, you mentioned the motor in that machine, so things like that could go in. In Ghent, they have vending machines specialised for, they have one for bakery, one for pharmaceutical products and baby products, another for meals. So again, it's that supporting things outside shop hours, where people aren't just carrying everything in their car if you're coming on by bus and train. So there's lots of other things, and I think the term I picked up was soft infrastructure. So how do we support people from, people with your daughter, but also even people with sort of slightly other, less severe things. It needs support in terms of getting people out and about.
Thank you.
Can I just answer that? It's a lot about the individual. The individual will adapt. Again, about your point in terms of how do they get the information. There are other wheelchair users and they do exchange, oh yeah, it's a good run up there, or that's a good route, or that's not. Or, oh yeah, just watch this at that particular point. But so they are individuals. The equipment I was showing you there isn't cheap, but if they're an outdoor person, like my daughter was, as I say, she was an outdoor instructor at one point, they still want to get out there. The fact that the legs don't work, to them is a minor detail. They want to be out there, and as I say, there were shots at the top of Horace Head, which Ewan Wainwright did a lot of stuff. Yes, you can get up onto these places, and it is possible. It's how you drive yourself, and it's encouraging others who are at that stage to progress a little bit. So it's almost within their own community as well, the wheelchair stroke disabled community, talk to each other and do. I talked about doing other things. We had 3 girls who'd got Usher syndrome, which, for those who probably don't know, is basically tunnel vision. So you get 2 toilet rolls, put them in front of your eyes. They can't hear, a lot of them, they've got deafness. They've also got balance issues. But these 3 girls, the first thing we did, right, we'll meet you in such and such a gaff, we'll have a discussion on what your problem, what you need. We then took those 3 girls and they did the Kinder Round, 21 miles over 2 days. So it is possible. It's just being able to talk to people, sort out what they want, not what I want, it's what they want, and how we can help them. For instance, if you've got Usher syndrome, if you're going through a wood where you've got light and dark, that will affect you. Where you're getting shadows, no shadows. Things like styles, they can go over styles, but they just need a little bit of guidance, say, just watch this bottom one. You may need to. Or the other thing is when the ground below gets wet, you go on a piece of boggy land across a field. You or I subconsciously see it, and your peripheral vision, oh, there's a boggy patch there, and you're already prepared for it. Somebody with Usher syndrome isn't, and it's the shock of, oh, my feet are going, what am I doing? And it's just that warning, telling, helping. And I think that's what we could all do. We can all do that to help you. So it isn't rocket science what we're trying to do.
That's a good note to end on. Thank you. Sorry, I need to move on to the next item. Yeah, thank you everybody for that. I think definitely, Sue, keep updating us on how you're spending. If you need any help spending the money, I'm sure there'll be some ideas and suggestions. But and I'd definitely like to follow up with you on what else we might be able to do on Standage North Lees, if there's a possibility to do something interesting there. And when we have always, since it was Andrew, wasn't it, who was on the forum before. So it might be interesting to see, again, if there's somebody from that community, and we're lucky enough to have you, John, but anyone else from that community who might want to become part of the LAF, I think, continuing to get that perspective.
What would it need? Cake? I don't know. Yeah, I think that would be good. Thank you, everybody. Sue, Silence Mine and the Green Lanes.
Okay, so the paper provided gives an update on the access land direction, which was considered, the access land direction at Silence Mine, which was considered at the March meeting of the forum. The local access forum provided a consultation response, and we had a number of other consultation responses, so thank you to everyone who provided the consultation responses. Because of the very active instability on this site, we decided to restrict for a 2-year period, which would allow the continuing assessment taking place, remediation and a period of monitoring. What I have suggested in the report as well, and what we'll be looking at is a site meeting with Derbyshire County Council officers, because the consultation was from the authority. It focused very much on access land, but clearly other access within the areas being affected, the public footpath, the restricted byway, but also the highway along the top of the road as well. Members may recall that there was a meeting with Derbyshire County Council officers 12 months ago, so we will be looking for an updated meeting, and we can report back to future local access forum on that as well, because it is really important about the prolonged restriction of access in the area and the impact that has had on people's access, not just to the actual site here, but also the connectivity for access in the area as well. The next item I've done is Green Lanes, and this is a short item for me, because the works on Green Lanes over this last year has predominantly been relating to the maintenance of routes, which helps deliver accessibility as well. There's been a very comprehensive scheme of repair by Derbyshire County Council, which you'll be hearing in the next item. But also, you might recall from the report last year that Staffordshire County Council are still progressing with very comprehensive repairs on the route at Swan and Limers Rake as well. I've also given a quick update, which again links in with my previous item, to talk about the accessibility enhancements, and Louise mentioned about the work at Long Causeway, and that was a traffic regulation order route, so it's about improving accessibility on that area. But also at Wetton Hills and Moscow Cross, we looked at replacing stiles with bridleway gates next to the field gates, and that will increase accessibility there for a range of users. So not just those in wheelchairs, because we know at both those routes that they're not promoted miles without stiles routes. But again, how we approach this, and as we've heard from John, it's about providing access for people, not necessarily having to be promoted access routes, but just the fact that access is available for people. So the wider gates don't provide the barrier, and it's for people to choose whether that route is actually suitable for them. Our speaker to the local access forum this morning, Sue, raised the fact about the actual reporting and the action plans. The action plans that we have are still extant. They're valid until the end of the year. So if you go on our website, you will see that the action plans are from 2022 to 2023. 2023. So they are still valid. In terms of how Green Lanes is being dealt with, it's going to be incorporated into the Recreation Hub work, with further reporting subject to resources and the National Park Management Plan. I'm afraid I don't have any details of this, and that's something that could potentially come back to a future local access forum meeting. Thank you. Oh, and sorry, a couple more items. Monitoring, so the ease of use survey that we carry out every 2 years. The results, hot off the press, 82% of the network was easy to use, and you might recall that the Local Access Forum had an update on this from Andy Farmer, and I think Andy was due to come back and speak to the Local Access Forum about that once he took these, once we had these latest results. And finally, I've done a very quick summary of the Access Fund to show what donations we've had. So donations are via the Peak District Foundation, the sales from the Miles Without Styles handbook, and the reason why I just mentioned visitor centres on the website is because at the March meeting of the Local Access Forum I said we'd received sponsorship from Yorkshire Water. So once we had that money, we then did a reprint because we had sold all 1,500 copies of the previous Miles Without Styles handbook, and all that funding went back into the Access Fund. So that's why when you look at the next paragraph and it shows all the range of works that have been carried out at various places, a lot of those about improving accessibility, but also on the Miles Without Styles route at Conksbury, and what we're planning to deliver for the next 20 Miles Without Styles route. You'll see that there's quite a long list. Thank you.
Thanks, Sue. Any questions for Sue on her update? Charlotte?
I'd like to just ask about the Swan and Limas rakes. I made a presentation on the pack horse routes a little while ago, and I will update everybody when things move along, but we're at the stage now where we're putting together a Heritage Lottery Fund bid, and part of the bid is repairs to the bridleway at Washgates. This is an ancient pack horse route. Those who have been to Washgates will see the fabulous stone pitching on the Derbyshire side, the River Dove forming the boundary between Derbyshire and Staffordshire. And part of our Heritage Lottery bid is to replicate that work on the Staffordshire side to make the route accessible to walkers, horse riders and cyclists. It would be really good if all that was then going to be able to connect into that extensive network of routes in that little particular part of Staffordshire. And I wondered if you knew when Swan and Limas rakes were likely to reopen, and whether what is going to be put in place to mitigate against further damage. You know, are Staffordshire going to say that it is a bridleway, or is it just going to be opened up? There is quite a forceful gatekeeper at the moment, the man who lives at the bottom in Hollingsclough. But I'm not quite sure what's going to happen moving forward, and I don't know if you could update us on that.
The short answer is, I'm sorry, Charlotte, I can't update you on what's happening at Swan and Lima Rake, other than the scheme, as I previously stated, was a very comprehensive, i.e. significant scheme. Very costly scheme, and the work is still ongoing. Drainage was a major issue there, and as you know, a consultation was undertaken by Staffordshire County Council about the existing use of the lane and any rights that might apply to that, and future use. And I'm sorry, I can't report any further on that.
Do you know if it's possible for us to ask that question of staffs?
Yeah, we can ask.
Shall we write to them? Okay.
Really, it's an appeal to both Sue and to Charlotte. When you're thinking about bridle ways and bridle gates, the big lever up here for the horses, or those on horseback, is great. Just think of wheelchair use, because they could do with a little latch lower down at their sort of level that can flick, so they can get the gate open. Thank you.
There's a lot of design work going on with the mechanism for opening bridle gates, and it's definitely part of that discussion. The trombone handles, issues around that, but yeah, thanks very much. But yes, definitely is part of the discussion. And they're a wider gate. Yeah. You know, it's not a footpath gate. You can get through with a wheelchair, with a push chair, a pram. It's you know, definitely it's for everybody. But yeah, thank you for that.
I love getting to gates, and there's 4 different ways to open it, and if you can access all of them, you're then in a mess of kind of, I don't know which one to pick. What do I? But that's fantastic to kind of see where that's kind of oh no, don't start there. Okay. Okay, yeah, Austin and Jez, and then we'll move on to, because I really want to get to Rob and the Derbyshire County Council Rights of Way Maintenance Plan.
Austin Knott. Very quickly, from recollection, Swan and Lima Rakes, the works were paused and recommenced in last month, May, and they're supposed to be carried on till autumn. I don't know what the outcome of their review of the rights along those routes was, but you and I might have looked at the original questionnaire and thought they wanted to come to a particular conclusion.
Okay. Charlotte and Austin, maybe the letter to Staffordshire, both of you guys can be involved in wording that carefully to make sure that we get all of our views across. Thank you, Austin. Jez?
Yeah, just a quick one. It does sometimes feel it's 2 steps forward, 1 step backwards. We're doing miles without styles, it's great. But equally, I keep coming across ordinary styles and they're putting planks across the top and just generally making them really difficult. And I'm just wondering, is there, if it's deliberate, then we're stuffed, but on the assumption it's not always deliberate, do we have some sort of education program? Here's how to be user-friendly, so that these landowners actually have an idea in their head, and it should be thinking, can my grandmother get over there with her grandson or something like that? Because they just seem to not even think about walkers. I don't know if there's an education program that might help.
Is that something the Rangers do at all?
Not specifically, no.
Sue?
I can just comment that in terms of the Farming in Protected Landscapes scheme, what we've been doing in the Peak District National Park is only giving grants for gates. And how the scheme is set up, as you've heard previously from Rebecca, is that it gives funding towards the landowners, those who are actually out there and can maintain the gates as well. And so we felt that was really quite crucial.
Sorry, the discussion here is that actually part of that is a question for Derbyshire County Council, I think, which is a great segue, if that's okay, actually, to move on to the next item, which I think is probably item 7 for you, although it's item 8 on my list. So it's the Derbyshire Rights of Way maintenance programme. So I'll let Rob introduce himself when he gets down here, but just to give a bit of context, you might recall, so between the last meeting and this meeting, a group of us met with the team at Derbyshire County Council to look at their Rights of Way maintenance planning programme, what was done last year and what's planned for this year. And part of that was looking at some of the routes where we've maybe got specific concerns and suggestions to add to the specifications. And really to support Derbyshire in order to be able to do that work in a way that's meeting kind of stakeholder and user needs. So Rob is going to update us on the programme. Charlotte is then going to talk about the outcomes of that meeting. Jill did send yesterday, I think it was yesterday, the note of that meeting. So all of you who've got that and can look at that, this is a topic that we're going to continually come back to because hopefully this will be an annual process with Derbyshire. So please do take a look at that, feed in any thoughts, yeah.
I'm just going to move on so I can see what he's saying.
Okay. Rob, over to you. Thank you.
Thanks, Louise. First of all, thanks for the invitation to be here. It's great to be here. My name's Rob Gretrix, and as the slide says, I'm the team leader for Public Rights of Way in Derbyshire. Previously, the title was Rights of Way Officer, but that changed when I was appointed, so that's the title that we use today. Okay. First of all, just a bit about the organisational structure. The Public Rights of Way team within Derbyshire sits within Place Department. Place Department is quite a large department, and one of those departments is the Highways Directorate, which I report to. As part of the Highways Directorate, we've got emergency planning, we've got the road safety partnership, we've got the design team, the construction team, strategy and network planning, which Rights of Way fits into. So the network planning part of the organisation includes traffic and safety. So these are our engineers that deal with traffic and safety issues, speed limits, yellow lines, that sort of thing. We've then got highway maintenance, which Rights of Way includes, as well as highway inspections. We've got street lighting, traffic signals, the Highways Hub that deals with all the administration and the licensing and all that sort of arrangements. We've got a structures management and maintenance team, so they deal with bridges, culverts, and that also includes public rights of way bridges. All public rights of way bridges are dealt with by or managed by our structures management team. And then of course we've got the civil parking enforcement team that deal with civil parking enforcement matters. So that's just a slide of a team that was taken up at Two Dales last year. The cabinet member has since changed. That's the guy at the front. So Councillor Athwell's no longer our cabinet member. We now report to Charlotte Cupit, I think it is. Yeah. So getting down to the nitty gritty and the team itself. Basically, you've got me as the team leader, so I head up the team, and I'm line managed by the senior project engineer for highways maintenance, which is a guy called Alan Tullock. Okay, so I have six rights of way inspectors, six rights of way assistants who are basically inspectors, and these are allocated to geographical areas within Derbyshire, and they basically respond to enquiries that are raised by members of the public and stakeholders. We've got two rights of way assistants who deal with legal orders, so public path orders, diversions, extinguishments, creations in some cases. And then we've got a rights of way assistant digitizer, and this post actually deals with the definitive map, keeps the definitive map up to date, and he supports the legal services officers as well. I also have one technical assistant. The technical assistant basically promotes temporary closures when temporary closures are required for public safety reasons. The technical assistant also responds to planning inquiries or planning consultations, and we've had quite a few successes in recent times where we've basically stopped paths from being developed on, which makes life a lot easier for us moving forwards. I'm very fortunate as well to have three other team members who are provided by an agency agreement. A project officer who's basically running the capital scheme programme. So Steve is liaising with the local access forums and with other partners in help to deliver the capital programme. And then he's supported by a support officer. I found out this week that he's leaving us, so we've got to recruit to that post. But that is as is today. And then I also have a rights of way assistant who's supporting the legal services people, okay, in trying to help promote the diversions and the applications that we have for public path orders. So what do? We manage and maintain the public rights-of-way network throughout Derbyshire, ensuring the successful delivery of the Council's duties, responsibilities and priorities as a highway authority, and thereby provide a safe, reliable public rights-of-way network for all users. And I've just quoted there a couple of pieces of legislation that obviously guides us in that. So we've got the general duty under Section 130 of the Highways Act to assert and protect the rights of the public to the use of the enjoyment of any highway for which they are the highway authority. And also Section 41 of the Highways Act, which is our duty to maintain those routes that are maintainable at public expense. We also have to ensure that the definitive map and statement is kept under continuous review, and we have to incorporate the changes that are made through legal events, through diversions, extinguishments and so on. Currently, we're a responsive service, so basically our work comes from members of the public who report issues to us. Not just members of the public, stakeholders, yourselves, landowners, parish councils, district councils and so on. So just to put things into context, this is the challenge that we have. The size of the network is quite, I think, quite big. Nearly 4,500 kilometres of public footpaths, 612 kilometres of bridleway, 69.8 kilometres of restricted byway, and 59 kilometres of byway open to all traffic. Obviously, this is county-wide and not just within the national park. So our priorities, basically our top priority is attending to public safety issues, and these can include responding to reports of missing and damaged drainage inspection covers, collapsed mine shafts, sinkholes, basically things that are a threat to the health and safety and well-being, or even life in some instances, to the public who use the network. And of course, one of our other priorities is the signposting of public rights-of-way where a right-of-way leaves a metal road. And this is something that I'm sure you will have noticed we've, as a council, invested in quite heavily over the last year or so, and we continue to do so moving forwards in this year. So what do we do as a function, as a team? We deal with inquiries, a wide range of inquiries, from barbed wire, bulls, aggressive animals, dangerous land adjacent to a public footpath or bridleway or public right-of-way. We keep the definitive map up to date, as I've said. We promote public path orders, creations, and in some instances definitive map modification orders, but in the main they are dealt with by our colleagues in legal services, but we do support them in that. Electric fences, encroachment, hedges and trees adjacent to a public right-of-way. That's something that really keeps us busy at this time of year, especially on paths that go down jitties and that sort of thing, where it's very easy for a path to become obstructed by seasonal growth. We deal with misleading signs and notices erected on a public right-of-way and other general obstructions such as fences. Of course, we also deal with ploughing and cropping, which is probably not in the Peak District, but elsewhere in the council. Ploughing and cropping is a big issue for us at this time of year. Including obstructions, of course, is stiles and gates that fall into disrepair, and also the authorisation of new structures, because, as you're probably aware, landowners cannot just add new structures to a public right-of-way without consent for the highway authority. We will always try to negotiate, wherever possible, a gap which meets the objectives of what we've been talking about earlier. If we can't, if a gap isn't suitable and we have to provide a stile or a gate, then we do, in most instances, only authorise a gate to the current British standard. If any stiles and gates are found to be in disrepair, or you think they've been tampered with, or they're not accessible, just let us know and we'll investigate. That's not a problem. Services on public rights of way. As I say, bridges, they're dealt with by our colleagues in structures management, but obviously we do liaise with them closely, and they liaise with us too. Ditches, so these are man-made ditches, ditches that are cut for land drainage purposes. Those are the responsibility of the landowner, and we will pursue the landowner to make sure that those structures are kept in good working order. And we do provide boardwalks where it's appropriate. Of course, signposting and waymarking, which is a big priority for us at the moment. And then, of course, there's the temporary closure side of the operation. We do try to keep them to a minimum where we can. But obviously, we do, from time to time, have to close down parts of the network when safety is paramount. I've just put this slide up. This just shows the workload from the 1st of April 22 to the 31st of March 23. The bottom line is we received 5,371 inquiries across the whole operation. So that can include obstructions, stiles and gates in disrepair, signpost reports, waymarking requests, that sort of thing. But we did manage to close down 4,670 of those inquiries. So part of our maintenance function is to carry out a surface vegetation clearance programme. We've just commenced that for 23-24. Basically, county-wide, we've selected 662 public rights of way that we will either cut or spray to manage the surface vegetation. Once between May and July, and some receive a second treatment in August to September. Okay. So the total length that we will cut, that shows, is 159 kilometres of public rights of way across Derbyshire. I think it's important just to say that the word spray may alarm some people, but it is effective in some parts of the county, especially where public rights of way follow a tarmac surface. Obviously, we can't do everything on our own. We are a small team with a limited budget, so we do rely on town and parish councils to contribute towards our work, and that is done under Section 43 of the Highways Act, which provides a power for a parish or community council to undertake maintenance on any public footpath or bridleway within its area. The highway to which the agreement relates must be a highway that's maintainable at public expense. It is only intended for minor works, but it does exclude work on restricted byways and byways open to all traffic. It also excludes the renewal of or reconstruction of footbridges and the repair of maintenance of public paths that are surfaced with tarmac or concrete or similar paved surfaces. And it also excludes the supply and direction of signposts on public paths, and there is a justified reason for that. 156 of the 204 Derbyshire parish and town councils are signed up to the scheme, but sadly in 22-23 only 61 councils actually participated, and that's something we're looking to build on, because obviously we do want to increase that, because local councils can provide a very cost-effective service in what we want them to achieve or hope to achieve. I just wanted to talk a little bit about the maintenance work that we carried out during 22-23. We improved the surface of 8.1 miles of public rights of way in Derbyshire. We renewed or installed 1,043 new signposts, and we waymarked 202 routes across Derbyshire. We also completed 240 minor schemes, so this could be basically pothole filling or minor patching at different locations, cutting the drainage grips, or clearing heavy vegetation. Of course, there's the capital programme for the current year, and we met with the subgroup earlier this year. I think it was the 18th of May.
Something like that.
Yeah. So I'm not going to go into great detail because Jill has actually tabled the minutes of those meetings, but I'm happy to take any questions if they arise.
I think Charlotte's going to talk about it as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
As a council, we're moving towards being an enterprising council. So the highway service is moving towards a mixed economy model. And as part of the review, all service areas will be looked at. So this includes public rights of way, of course. We're creating 2 new service areas to help us transform the way we work. That's a commissioning and delivery arms. The review will look into how the services are currently delivered and how they can be delivered in the future. I'm hoping that the review will look into how volunteering can be integrated into the service, how minor maintenance agreements with town and parish councils can be improved, and the replacement for the ease of use survey. We've not actually carried out any ease of use survey in Derbyshire since pre-COVID, but we were keen to do that. But we want the survey, the review, to identify that and guide us in which direction that should go. And the new operation model should be implemented by March 24. As I say, we are a responsive service, and we do respond to inquiries that we receive from members of the public, from stakeholders, landowners, etc., etc. So the best way to report things are via our website, our portal. You will get an auto acknowledgement. You can trace your inquiry, and it ensures that inquiry gets to the right person. And all we're after really is a better customer experience, and we should get that eventually, all being well. If you believe an issue is really dangerous, then call Derbyshire on the number that's there, or in extreme circumstances, just phone it through to the police. We are a 24-hour operation, 365 days a year. So if the police think it is something that needs escalating, it can be escalated, and it can be dealt with at any time, or of any day, of any time of the year. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Rob. I've learnt loads. I don't know about the rest of you. Are we okay to circulate those slides after the meeting to everybody?
Yeah,
so
that's fine.
Yeah, especially that email address will be very useful to just be able to click onto. Charlotte is going to talk about the subgroup meeting that we had about the planning, but does anyone have questions now for Rob about what he's talked about, the way that the service is operating? And anything that's been raised in that? Claire.
Claire Griffin again. Not really a question, just a comment. like, you've got a tiny team for all that you achieve and all of your remit, haven't you? You know, just that team for dealing with those emergency, you know, giant car swallowing potholes and sinkholes and things, as well as, you know, just maintaining the kind of footpaths infrastructure. I just want to say, well done. It's really impressive.
Yes, we are. Thanks for that. Yes, we are a small team. Yeah, and I think we do quite a lot with the resources that we do have. Yeah, thank you.
Martin.
I'd like to just do calculations, Rob. Thanks very much for all of that. Great reminder of all the things you do. I think I've come back to sort of 5,233 kilometres of rights of way that you look after. And I think that's about 2% of the national network. And again, I just think to emphasise that, you know, Derbyshire, my view, certainly Derbyshire Dales and probably most Derbyshire, is pretty good compared to parts of the country. If we go to other things, so I think that's sort of a credit to both PROW and to Derbyshire County Council for supporting that.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Charlotte?
Just a quick comment, having used both your emergency call out, because we had a mysterious hole appear in a lead mining area, so you came and investigated and it didn't go any further than its original hole, but the path was closed within 3 hours of me reporting it, and also I had to report a query on a rights of way, and I did get my automated, and was able to follow it up, and eventually I managed to get somebody to come and have a look at it. So it does work.
Austin.
Really quickly, yeah, echoing things that people have said. I live across in Staffordshire, so my expectations are always quite low when I'm going to deal with rights of way. I'll say it and I'll say it again. But when I've had to report issues, particularly in Derbyshire, the automated response comes back, which is nice. And I've even had emails back from officers and phone calls, and things have dealt with quickly. And it's, yeah, compared to my experience in my normal working area, it's just a joy to report things that I find on your rights of way network.
Is that what you were expecting to? Thank you. I've got a question, if that's okay. So you mentioned about parish participation, which is relatively low, and this move to a mixed economy model and potentially relying more on volunteers and maybe parishes to be involved. And it's something that we've talked about as a group before. And one of the things we've talked about is recreational users, so who aren't necessarily resident or living in parishes, but have the ability to pull volunteer groups together to be able to support maintenance of paths. I know, those of you who might know Peter Judd, who's one of the BMC hill walking volunteers, he's very keen on groups of BMC volunteers adopting perhaps sections of path to do that kind of ongoing maintenance that maybe the parishes might do. And also thinking of things like PPCV with the park as well. So I suppose my question to you is, there's obviously lots of people out there who either are or want to get involved in that kind of maintenance who are not necessarily coordinated together at the moment. And is that something that you're looking at or thinking about? Is it something that the park is involved in, or, yeah?
Yeah, if we take a step back to prior to 2018, 2019, when Public Rights of Way was in the Countryside Service, there was a dedicated volunteer officer.
Yeah. Unfortunately,
through the cuts, that post went, and then Public Rights of Way was lifted from the Countryside Service to the Highway Service. When you put rights of way into a highway service and then you throw in volunteering, that really gets people thinking, because it's unheard of. You know, people don't volunteer in basically highway operations.
Yeah.
Having said that, we are mindful that people are keen to volunteer, and we do want to engage with volunteers, and we want to utilise them. It's just how we do it. Having said that, Jill and myself attended the Derby and Derbyshire LAF last week, Richard Bonner was there from Derby Countryside Service doing the presentation, and we found out that the Countryside Service is hoping to set up a volunteering arm again. Is that fair to say, Jill?
Yeah, just saying,
Yeah.
the next 12 months it sounded like it, and have a coordinating officer again.
Yeah, coordinating officer, that's right. Yeah. And that's something that we could possibly utilise through a service level agreement with Countryside Service, so volunteering can come back to public rights of way. It's early days, but things are looking better than they were last Friday.
That's great, thank you.
Yeah, I discussed it with my line manager, and you know, he thinks that's probably the way for it to go.
Well, I know, well, certainly the BMC would encourage that, and I
Yeah.
suspect all the organisations here
Yeah.
would encourage that approach, if that's
But-
to
but-
the extent that volunteers can do
Yeah.
work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. If people come to me and say they want to volunteer, I tend to push them in the direction of local town and parish councils.
Yeah.
Because they can help. They can help them. So I sort of signpost them to the appropriate local council.
We do also support some groups, as I report in my update, through our service level agreement with Groundwork.
You've got
Greater
Groundwork.
Nottingham.
Yeah.
But I think if we follow the same model as our coordinator from before, the idea is to get some of these groups to be sustainable and
Yeah.
to have the skills and the information to go out and do this
Mm.
work on their own. And like I say, a lot of this sort of ongoing preventative maintenance is really helpful. You know, sort of clearing some drains, that sort of thing, 'cause it just stops roots deteriorating
Yeah.
if the drainage is functioning properly. So I think there's room to have some chats about this, isn't there, Rob? And make sure that we get some rights of way things tackled as well. Because Countryside will want to have volunteers for their sites and trails and that sort of thing. So I think we bring that side in as well on the public rights of way network.
Thank you. Mike?
Yes, and of course we have our volunteers, an extensive programme of conservation, including rights of way improvement works done by our Peak Park conservation volunteers as part of our contribution towards Derbyshire County Council's service level agreement. So anyone wanting to volunteer to do work in general conservation work, but which will include rights of way, then the Peak District National Park very much involved with that as well.
Thank you. Jez, Martin, and then I'll move on to Charlotte's report.
Yeah, just on the volunteering, the way it used to work in Derbyshire that I thought was very effective was when it was a maintenance team from Ramblers, say, and a countryside ranger, because there's a lot of admin type stuff to do in terms of permissions from landowners that those teams weren't necessarily able to do. The information about what work was needed as a priority. Obviously, you have the information coming in from the public about all these things, so you know you're in a better position to say this needs doing, that needs doing, rather than what volunteers might think. And I know you're separate now from Countryside Services, but I would seriously look at, could you get some Countryside Service ranger time to work with volunteers, because I think that's very effective.
Martin?
Just on volunteers, I know from my time in school, volunteers are great to have in, but I'm sure, as we all know, it does take coordination of volunteers, so you've got to have the resources to manage that. And the second thing is to just say that in Derbyshire Dales, I coordinate 40 path wardens, so that's an avenue for any volunteers. If anyone's looking for something to do, I'm happy to pass them on to me.
Thank you. Okay. Charlotte?
Right, first of all, I'd like to say thanks very much to Rob and the project officer Steve for coming and meeting with us. We had a very open and frank discussion about plans moving forward, and I hope that the contributions made by our members. So the team that was there was Paul, Nick and Martin, and Louise. So we went through all the schemes of work and looked at the works that have been completed over the past year. And thank you very much for that. Oops, lost my notes. And thanks, Jill, for sending your notes round to everyone. Has everybody had the list of works that were done and the mapping so that everybody's okay and so we don't need to go through any of that?
I don't know that we sent round the mapping, but the list was in the note.
The list.
Oh, it did. Okay.
Yeah. So I think if there's any questions that anybody has, I don't know if anybody else who was on that group has any comments that they would specifically like to make. It was a really, really useful meeting. I hope it was useful for you too, Rob, and that the information moving forward will be helpful. We've got a few site meetings possibility just to look at a few things that are a bit tricky to get a user's perspective on it. So it was very, very good. So thank you.
Paul or Martin, is there anything you want to add from?
This was a mapping which came around because there were lots and lots of bridleways, restricted byways and boats and predominantly for those of us who were reasonably knowledgeable. This really just helped locate them, so that's been really useful. Perhaps I might want to have a look at that.
That was an appendix to Jill's paper.
Pardon?
That was an appendix to Jill's paper.
Okay. Oh, right, it was an appendix to... I see, yes. So I think from my perspective, what was really useful in that meeting was that we had kind of representatives from... We had cyclists, horse riders and walkers in that meeting. So particularly when we were looking at things like bridleways, it was really helpful to be able to bring a broad range of perspectives. I think the thing that came up in that meeting that you kind of also slightly raised in your presentation was around, so some of the issues on some of the routes were, let me step back, was around vegetation control. So one of the things that I'd raised, obviously with everything around No Mow May and looking at biodiversity across the park, is, you know, can we use the edges of rights of way to sort of maintain some of that biodiversity? But then the conversation was around, actually there's a challenge there because some users don't like it and will complain about it. And in some cases you've got the risk of it starting to block the path, so that the balance that you guys need to strike between those two things. Yeah, and I guess that's an ongoing sort of conversation around how we do that.
Yeah, I mean, basically the clearance work that we do is basically for safety. If it's not required for safety reasons or to allow access down a bridleway, then we leave it. We don't touch it. We don't want to cut grass or cut back vegetation that we don't have to. So it's just basically to maintain public safety and to protect the right of the user.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think the other issue that was quite interesting, I can't remember who raised it, but was the question about how do you, if we're looking at climate change and extreme weather events becoming more of an issue for path maintenance because paths get washed out, what work can be done with farmers around trying to manage the drainage on the edges of the paths to stop, basically we can do drainage works on paths, but effectively it would be much better if the water didn't end up on the path and was much better controlled in the land around it. Obviously that's less, I don't think that's something that your team do, but something that happens more broadly. Is that, I think Richard Pett said something around that, around working with farmers, I guess, in general, around managing drainage and water retention.
We do have a flood risk team that we work with very closely.
Yeah.
It'd be great if we could encourage landowners and land managers to maintain ditches and watercourses, especially adjacent to upward rights of way, because that can lead to washouts. Yeah, it's a good point.
Yes, just on that, it does feel almost it's the other way around sometimes. Landowners use footpaths as their drainage, and there's some around us where they get washed away regularly and the water's completely trapped. And the other thing that happens is they get sunken, and sunken paths are great for channeling water and also for making the path that wide when it's supposed to be 2 metres. And there's almost, you need to raise paths to actually prevent some of the problems. But yeah, there's no legislation that requires landowners to not, or is there, to not flood paths with their drainage?
Yes, there is legislation that we can use under flood risk and under highway maintenance as well. And we do use them.
Is there any work done to identify paths at particular risk from increased flooding and to, rather than legislate against them, but to try and work, I guess I'm thinking a targeted programme of working with specific landowners on routes, rights of way that are maybe either particularly impacted or particularly heavily used, and therefore, I don't know if is there any that kind of prioritisation work done in the national park?
I suppose it would depend on individual schemes, won't it? And it might be necessary to work in conjunction with the landowner if you're doing one scheme on one of your routes, mightn't it? So, it'd be a scheme by scheme basis, I would have thought. There was just one little thing to add, if I don't mind. I think I mentioned at the subgroup that there was a project underway to look at roadside verges and how to improve the biodiversity. We've got a project officer based, I think, in our design and conservation team, Susan White, who's doing that work. She has actually sent me an information sheet about the work she's doing and whether some of those principles at the end of the project could be applied to, you know, land alongside rights of way. It might be possible, but just what she's learnt from that. So I'll circulate that round to everybody. There's some quite interesting information. So
thank you.
Okay, thank you.
If there's any more questions, no more questions on that, or questions for Rob? Thank you very much. That was really, yeah, like I say, I learnt a lot. And yeah, thanks for the meeting that we had. And yeah, we'll keep that as an annual process where we'll keep an eye on that. We'll sort of keep talking to you about that process.
Yeah, it might be a good idea if we can sort of come back later on in the year or early part of next year just to talk about the review. Just in case anything, you know, comes out of that we need to gauge opinion on, support, better ideas.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay.
So it's November and then February, March, I think. So whenever we can talk to you about the right timing for that. Thank you. And I think we'll have Andy Farmer coming to the next meeting to talk about the ease of use survey in the Peak District National Park, which Sue mentioned. So it may well be that we'll come back to some of these questions in November as well. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you. Jill.
Thank you very much. I'm looking at the clock.
I'm going to run the meeting just, we started a bit late, so I'll run kind of to 22:01 if that's okay. But if anyone needs to leave at 5:30, please leave. Yeah, that's fine.
Well, I have circulated my report. That one did come out a bit earlier than the notes. I do apologise that they were a bit late. But so really, you've got the report. I suppose some of the things to pick out of it, Charlotte might wish to pick out some of the things. But the main thing for us was our success in getting just over £3 million from Active Travel England through their Tranche 4. It's going to committee to be accepted, I'm sure, tomorrow on the 15th of June. So if you want to see the committee report, it is available on our website. The work is principally 2.73 million to construct the Little Eaton Greenway, which runs, it's outside this area, but it's a significant project as part of a route linking Ripley into Derby City. So 2.73 million is to construct that route as a multi-user path. And the remainder of the money, whoever's good at maths, I think it's 275,000, is to do further development work on the White Peak Loop. So those missing sections, we'll be picking up the Monsell Trail and bringing that into Buxton and up to Harper Hill to join the rest of the route from there. So those are really my main highlights. I want to thank Martin for all the work you did providing those comments on the Via Gellia, the Safer Road scheme. So I'm still working with the project officer on that to see what we can deliver as part of that scheme to improve basically road safety on the Via Gellia, but also I've said, you know, we could do with looking at how we improve the safety of people who end up on that route from the various rights of way that come and join it. So I'll keep you informed of that work. And then it's really, Charlotte, if there's anything you want to add about unrecorded ways or Pennine Bridle Way. Thank you.
So the unrecorded ways, there was an indication that government was going to get rid of the cut-off date, but they've now decided to extend it for a further 5 years. So it's good that we've got another 5 years, but it just pushes another deadline, that's all it's done. It's now going to continue to create a large bottleneck of definitive map modification orders. I still see this as historic evidence as being the best way that we can improve the bridleway network, certainly. And at the moment, the way Derbyshire deals with DMMOs is by doing it on a first come, first served basis. But I think there's, well over 300, isn't there now, that are waiting to be reviewed. Some of them are never ever going to get to the top of the pile while the usefulness is there. And I think we need to look at some way of being able to filter through so that we can get the most useful paths, the ones that are going to benefit the most people, to the top of the pile. And I don't know how that is done. But those, hats off to those who continue to do this historic research, and they're just lodging claim after claim after claim just because we are going to lose that opportunity to do it in 5 years' time. And they just need to be there, because once they're gone, they're gone. And it would be a shame that if we did lose that. Pennine Bridleway, we're continuing to work on the route. There's some interesting work being done now around the Glossop area, and the continuing funding to get the project shovel ready is very much welcome. So thanks for that, Jill. Can I also ask something that came up? Bamford Clough, there was an experimental TRO consultation. Do you know where that's up to? It's something we've all been interested in.
I might have to look at Rob, and I don't want to put you on the spot because I don't know anything about that. Would you? Or
somewhere in my emails.
Can you press your button?
Sorry, somewhere in my emails, there's a draft paper that I've got to look at that's got to go to our cabinet member to make a decision or a guidance on the TRO, experimental TRO. Yeah.
So that's within this year?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. And the other thing, could you just tell me where we're up to with Pindale? I'm sorry, I had complete brain fog on where that was. Is that all? There's some remedial work, is there, or?
Yep. Yes, I believe there is some remedial works to be done. I'll ask Steve where we are with that and come back to you if that's okay.
Thank you. Martin?
Just on Charlotte's issue about claiming lost ways, this book, for most of you know, Restoring the Record, from Phil Wadey, is absolutely invaluable. It's also a beautiful book as well, but if anyone's thinking of making any claims, that's really good. Jill, just on Virgelia and to Rob, I was just down there over the weekend, and I have to say there's one lethal bit on, I think it's Middleton Foot 21, where you walk for about 100 metres round a bend. It's the most scary thing, so that needs to do. Active travel, I listened to Danny Williams, the Chief Executive in Living Streets, and very impressive, and the 3 million is great. However, my only bit of dampener is I've just come back from a cycling holiday from the Netherlands, and we really need to be pushing cycling at scale and at pace. Thank you.
Thank you, Martin. Thank you. Any other comments or questions for Jill? No. Thank you. Thanks, Jill.
That's okay.
So just a couple more items and then lunch and sunshine. So I guess first is Ben, from the beginning when we were talking about updating on the access to water and right to roam and what's happening in Westminster.
Sorry, I couldn't read my handwriting at the start, but I've deciphered it, and I think I know what I've written down. I guess since we last met, there's been a couple of interesting developments. Can't remember when the last meeting was, but I think Labour had come out and talked about their intention to bring a right to roam bill, and it was after all the hoo-ha on Dartmoor and the wild camping, and there was noise made around a right to roam bill. Well, since we last met, there was an access to nature debate in the House of Commons. I don't know how many of you tuned in. It wasn't exactly the most enlightening of debates. It was sort of hijacked by mainly Conservative MPs talking about how wonderful their constituencies are and how nature-rich they are. So it wasn't amazing. British Canoeing got a mention for its Paddler's Code. I guess the highlight was the end, really, when Alex Sobel, who is the Environment Minister, Shadow Environment Minister, stood up and reaffirmed Labour's commitment to bring about a right to roam bill. He set out that Labour would bring a law allowing national parks to allow wild camping, and it would extend access to woodlands and waterways. Following a Scottish example, which I imagine struck fear into the heart of many around the country, but delight into others. I think the key sentence, really, that Alex Sobel said was that Labour wanted to replace the default for exclusion with a default for access. So I think we've got some really interesting conversations to come in the next few years, potentially. The reason being is because I had that reaffirmed last week. So British Canoeing had a Westminster reception launching our new charter, and Jim McMahon, who is the Shadow Environment Secretary, came to speak, and again he reiterated what he said about Labour's absolute laser-like focus on delivering more access for people, including access to water, through a right to roam bill, and then he spent the rest of the talk talking about sewage pollution, which is his passion. So really interesting times. Interestingly, on the same day that we launched our charter, Theresa Coffey did a speech in a Future Countryside conference. Tellingly, no access organisations were invited. It was a certain partisan audience that she was playing to, and said unequivocally the Conservative Party would not be bringing a right to roam bill ever. So we have a clear choice, I think, in the next general election. Alongside that is, well, what are the government doing then at the moment? And I think the answer to that, if I'm blunt, is not a great deal, but they do have this 15-minute commitment to nature, which some of you will know. And I think that's important for the group to be aware of and keep following. There's no real clear idea on what it is yet. Theresa Coffey announced it, I think it was in January, that everyone should have access to green or blue space within 15 minutes of walk of home. And that's as far as we've got so far. In terms of how that actually becomes a reality is very unclear. We had a DEFRA Access stakeholder, Access to Nature stakeholder group meeting this week, and I asked the question, well, how are you actually going to do this? How are you going to make this a reality? They described 3 ways, one of which would be to make current parks or green space more accessible to more people, so probably play into the first half of the presentation Sue made earlier today. So that sounds great. Obviously limited in the places we've already got access. Extending things like green social prescribing. And I can't remember the third, so I can't tell you what it is. But suffice it to say, there isn't anything really tangible yet that we can say of how they're going to deliver this 15-minute commitment to nature. I asked the question of whether they would, cheekily ask the question of whether DEFRA intends to bring additional legislation to create this access, because when you talk about blue space, there isn't much it's all around us, but we haven't got access. But DEFRA are clearly trying to bide their time ahead of the next general election. They said they're going to spend the next 12 months mapping, baseline dataing, so that's speak for we're just going to kind of hang out for the next year and see where the wind blows after the general election. So I think this 15-minute to nature commitment is going to be interesting to follow, because that's the only show that the government have got really in town, apart from the English Coast Path, which doesn't really affect us. But then, you know, how the general election will pan out, because there could be some significant discussions in this group in the next few years. Already at the access organisations, BMC, Ramblers, OSS, Horse Society, we're starting to look at okay, how do we react to that? What would a right to roam bill look like for us? What are the red lines? What are the things that we need to protect? How do we protect the rights of way network if a Scottish style was supposed to was actually becoming a reality? So that's the work we're doing at the moment, and I'm sure people like Natural England and DEFRA are also starting to get their thinking caps on as to what work needs to be done to prepare should a Labour government bring about the changes that they're already mooting quite vociferously. So yeah, it's a really interesting time at the moment. The only other one that I actually, while you were talking, Rob, I was looking, there was the Levelling Up and Regeneration Bill that's going through the Lords. There was supposed to be an amendment around putting a duty on local authorities, planning authorities, to make well-being a requirement for new planning applications. I don't think, looking online, I can't find reference to it in the latest version of the bill, so I don't think that's gone through, which is a bit of a shame. That's it.
Thanks, Ben.
Interesting times.
Yes. Yeah, and I think they're interesting questions. For me, I'm interested, well, in lots of it, but I think for us as a group, what's the role of, if we move to a presumption of access, what does the role of a LAF become? I think forums like this become more important because I think you have the potential for far more conflicts, questions, needs for landowners and users to talk to each other and be able to address land impacts, nature impacts, all of the sort of consequences of something like that. So, as Ben says, interesting times.
Just one last thing. I've got a really interesting paper that actually Kath sent me from the BMC. It's by the Royal Ecological Society, the British Ecological Society, and it's all about how do we balance wildlife conservation with public access. And it's fascinating, and they come up with 6 proposed, i.e. that these two aren't mutually exclusive, and that actually it's in wildlife's benefit to dissipate access rather and create more access rather than focus the growing amount of participation in outdoor sports in such a small. So it's a really interesting article, and if it's all right, maybe we could circulate it around the LAF, because I think adds to that debate that we will eventually have around what sort of restrictions might we need to create, what sort of protections might a new bill need to create. That's all got to sort of be discussed. So
That would be fascinating, because again, questions around: do you sacrifice a few sites so that the others don't, or do you try to spread people? There are lots of really interesting questions. Thank you for that, Ben. I'm sure we'll come back to all of that in later meetings. So just a couple of other small things. I think, Dave, did you want to talk about the Wild Peak Rounds?
I can briefly, if that's okay. Are you happy to click on the... I can come round if you want.
And we can circulate the information as well. It's all right. There we go. Now we've got 3.
Is one of them a map? Hopefully one of the...
Next one down. Second one. Yeah, there we go.
Ah, perfect. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you. I'll be brief. I'll read you the email that my colleague has sent. This came about. I have a masochistic team member who took up fell running about 6 years ago and now regularly does 100-kilometre runs throughout the country. And with that inspiration, she decided to look at one of our projects, Wild Peak, that I spoke to you about last time, and kind of got her passions together. So she said, this is what she says. She says, this is the email she'll send out. And I'm really interested in if this is a ridiculous idea, what things we haven't thought of. Even if you think it's obvious, it might be something that we haven't thought of. This is going to go out to the landowners that are involved. We're currently developing an exciting idea to create a walking and running challenge in North Derbyshire, starting and finishing in Bakewell and linking up 16 Derbyshire Wildlife Trust nature reserves. This will not only aim to raise awareness of DWT nature reserves and the work we carry out, but also highlight the fragmentation of high quality and diverse habitats in and wildlife, while showing opportunities for better ecological links and nature-based solutions between the reserves, maybe also generate some donations as well. So she's proposing 3 rounds that all start and finish in Bakewell in varying length, visiting a set number of nature reserves. So there'll be no set time or route particularly, but participants decide when they want to go and what route they want to take between each of the reserves, as long as they're on public rights of way and can be in any order or direction. They'll need to send in proof of completion, like an email or Garmin or Strava watch trace with screenshot. And participants will encourage to donate to DWT and will have a dedicated web page. So there'll be a mini round that's 15 kilometres that takes in one reserve. It's a vague idea of a route that could be taken on there. A half round which is 50 kilometres, and a full round which is running 115 kilometres to do 15 nature reserves, which you think is she's an amazing human being. So that's kind of the vague route, and then if you wouldn't mind clicking on just a couple of the pictures that are there as well. So to be pretty non-invasive, I think you may have opened the mic as the tabs above. Okay. Oh, there's another map. Yeah. Fab. And then basically there'll just be kind of little discs on various waymarkers. There might be new waymarkers. They could be added to existing waymarkers to show that people have been to them. There'll be kind of unique ones. There you go. There's an idea for our amazing site at Cheadale. So it'll be just kind of, a little bit like that. So if anyone's got anything immediate to say, or have you thought about this, or that's an amazing idea, or that's a ridiculous idea, or anything in between, or any of the above, that'd be great.
Claire. I think it's a brilliant idea. There's loads of these big challenge rounds.
Yeah.
I think doing it as a anytime round is a really good idea. So you're sort of reducing the impact. Loads of them are a lot less loadable. I'm actually wearing one today. Yeah. It's a round of all the peaks you can see from a particular cafe in Keswick. It's nothing more than that. Yeah. It's brilliant. It's a really great way of raising awareness. The Peak District doesn't, well, I mean, you've got the 5 trigs and things like that, but there aren't that many big challenge rounds in the Peak District. Probably one thing I would say is, so I've got this T-shirt, but a lot of organisers of challenges like this are maybe trying to move away from that now, because you think, do you actually need another wicking shirt? Maybe think about what you're going to give. You definitely don't need a big chunky medal or potentially not a T-shirt. That's probably all I would say.
Thank you.
Paul?
Having just run Mavericks a fortnight ago, I didn't run the full lunatic distance. I ran the semi-sane distance around Bakewell. Great idea. The more of these things are great, really well attended. There was lots of interest. Just get loads of publicity out about that. There's a very big distance running community that'll buy into it. It's a great idea. Love it.
Thank you.
I think outside at Hathersage have a round as well, done in a very similar way, obviously without the signage. So it'll be interesting to see where it goes. Thank you, Dave.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. And I guess if anyone's got any comments or questions, they can just get in touch with you directly. Yeah, we'll email around. So just one final thing, which is from me, which is at the Upper Derwent Valley Reservoir extension. So that the proposals for that should go in from Severn Trent in July, and at that point we will know what their proposals are. I think I circulated round between the meetings that the National Park Authority had issued a holding objection on the basis of impact on the National Park of the construction and then the subsequent existence of either the reservoir or raising the heights of the existing reservoirs. So it's just really to let you know that, first of all, Severn Trent have offered to come to a LAF meeting to talk about their proposals, but they weren't going to come to this one because they didn't want to come until they put their proposals in. So potentially they might be at our November meeting to talk about that. If that's the case, I'll let you know. The second is that the Kinder and High Peak Access Advisory Committee, which advises, a bit like this group, that advises the National Trust on the management of their Kinder and High Peak estate from a stakeholder perspective, they are holding a meeting on the 30th of July, which will be just after the submission, which will be open to wider groups of stakeholders around, which Severn Trent will be at to talk about. Henry Focard, some of you remember, chairs that group, and he's going to be in touch with people to invite people beyond just the committee so that a bigger group of stakeholders can see what's being proposed. So if you're interested in that, actively interested in that, I guess let me know now. But equally, it's, I think possibly invitations will go out to either all or some members of the LAF as well around that. But I guess just to let you know, and there is CPRE, Friends of the Peak are coordinating a coalition of concerned stakeholders to essentially make sure Severn Trent are aware of access, wildlife and other concerns about the proposal. Thank you. Anything else anybody wants to raise before lunch? Austin, Paul, Martin.
Really brief, and it's, yeah, Austin not. It's a reiteration of something I said last time. The Severn Trent proposals aren't just about Upper Derwent Valley. Right. They're across the whole of the Peak District, down to Carsington, which I appreciate is just outside the Peak District, across to Tittisworth, which breaches into the Peak District. But there are all sorts of expansions there, and there's also various expansions of the pipeline network that connects all those reservoirs up to Upper Derwent, and in and out, import and export of water in and out of the Severn Trent area. So it's much larger than that. The big elephant in the room, there are a lot of other things, so don't take our eye off what's going on elsewhere.
Yeah, I think Henry's keen to get you at that meeting as well, actually, Austin, to think about that. I think it's on a Sunday, though, so, yeah. Thank you. Paul?
Yeah, Paul Richardson, just a quick one. And it's just to praise Austin's local authority. The guys are over in the mountain biking group over on the Staffordshire side have been talking to them about Hollins Clough and work on Hollins Clough and consulting, and it would appear that their updates that were going to go on the website, nothing's gone up, and they've started works and there's large dumps of aggregates going on at the foots of some trails. Anybody know anything? Anybody know what's happening?
Sorry, they'll be the ones at Hollins Clough that have been mentioned earlier in the meeting.
Right.
Swan and Lima Rakes.
Ah, right, okay. Didn't recognise the name. Do we have any connection in there to try and find more information? Because we've been back and forth.
There was a proposition earlier in the meeting that a letter would be written to Staffordshire to find out what's going on with their contractor, Amy.
Thank you. Does that answer your question, Paul?
Yeah, and if we can participate in that letter, that'd be great.
Okay.
Write some strong words.
I'll link you in. Martin, then Jeff, and then we'll have some lunch.
The reason so that the agenda item on just on member training.
Oh, sorry, Martin. Yeah.
It just occurs to me that with a big emphasis on access land and rights of way, from Rob's presentation, there's obviously knowledge of rights of way is taken for granted. It just occurs to me, is everybody okay with that? So, for example, things like the definitive map. If Ever's made a report, the map report, we've gone through that. Perhaps in terms of training, whether before a session we could just have 20 minutes looking at the definitive map for people who aren't quite familiar. A sort of drop-down menu with lots of extra information. That was just one idea. And then just other things. More for me is that with the wider thing, with the national park, I did notice on the National Park Authority it's got some essential member training that goes on. Whether we could join in that, whether it would be appropriate. But each time I'm from these meetings, I read through all the key documents, the management plan and the statement of community involvement. And I have to say I've usually forgotten most of it the last time I've read it. So whether there's a list of documents would be helpful for everybody. We have got our Peak District Local Access Forum forward plan, which is pretty useful. But just on just general things, do members feel we would need any training in particular areas, anything extra to supplement and help our roles?
Any thoughts on that? We could possibly send that round as an email question and people could have a think about it. One thing that Mike and I talked about was that the National Park does provide a lot of some online and other in-person training for volunteers, rangers and in other parts of the authority, which LAF members don't have access to. It's through a portal called Better Impact. And I was wondering if perhaps as volunteers, LAF members might be able to access that and perhaps therefore take advantage of existing training opportunities that, because the rangers, for example, are already trained in things like public rights of way and biodiversity and all of these different things, some of which is online, some of which isn't. But where it is, perhaps we'd be able to potentially take advantage of that if people wanted to or needed to. That would be something to follow up.
I'll follow it up.
Thanks, Mike. Thank you, Martin. Jeff?
Just a very quick one on the Severn Trent thing. I think the preferred option when they did Carsington was probably the Upper Derwent Valley, but it didn't happen for obvious reasons.
Yes.
I keep trying to find the original documents. I think there were 7 sites originally that were looked at, and one of them was flooding the Edale Valley, I think. But I was trying to find, you know, the kind of back stuff from
Friends of the
from all
Peak have
that.
got the leaflet.
Have they?
From
Yeah.
that. Do you know Andy Tickle?
Yes, I do.
He's
yeah.
got a copy. He's got a copy of some of that
Right,
stuff.
okay.
if
So I
he's-
might contact
maybe
Andy
get in
and
touch
find
with
that
him.
out. But it's all happened before, is the
Yes, yes, it was it was a really interesting campaign leaflet. Okay. On that note, I will bring the meeting to a close. So our next meeting will be on Wednesday, the 1st of November, here. We've got a number of items already that we'll kind of look at in terms of the agenda for that meeting. So potentially Severn Trent talking about Upper Derwent, Andy Farmer perhaps talking about the ease of use survey, but as usual we'll get together and look at that. But if anyone, as always, if anybody wants to raise a topic, an issue at a meeting as an agenda item, please do. It's our meeting to look at those, whatever issues or concerns are coming up for you in your area or activities in the park. So unless anyone's got anything burning to say, it's lunchtime. Thank you. Oh, Sue.